Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for being here. My name is CJ Depperdine. I am the host of Untapped Gold Mines. You can find all episodes at untappedgoldmines.com. And I am here with none other than Drew Dudley, an amazing human being, first and foremost, beyond all of his accomplishments. Drew is an amazing human being. I've had the pleasure to work with Drew when he came in as a speaker at one of the former organizations that I was with, and just a fantastic human being. So I'm hoping that you will absolutely love listening in to this session and learning from Drew where he sees the greatest untapped gold mines. And there are plenty in our world today and around leadership. So just to give you a bit of background about Drew, if you don't know Drew already, Drew's an internationally acclaimed leadership speaker and Wall Street Journal's best-selling author. Called one of the most inspirational TED speakers in the world, Drew Dudley is on a mission to help people unlearn some dangerous lessons about leadership. As a founder and chief catalyst of Day One Leadership, he has helped top organizations around the world increase their leadership capacity. His clients have included McDonald's, American Express, JP Morgan Chase, and United Way, and more than 100 colleges and universities. Prior to this, Drew spent 8 years as a director of one of Canada's largest leadership development programs at the University of Toronto. Drew is also the best-selling author of This is Day One, a practical guide to leadership that matters. And this is it. Prior to this, Drew was also one of the top speakers on TED.com. His Everyday Leadership Lollipop Moments TED Talk was voted one of the most 15 inspirational talks, TED Talks of all times, and it is a fantastic TED Talk. It has been very pivotal. So did I miss anything, Drew?
You might have added some stuff in there. I was just along for the ride.
Oh.
I was like, every time I listed those bios, I'm just like, man, you sound way cooler than you are. Nicely done. You pulled something off in your life.
Right. I think you've pulled off plenty. And I know that for myself, when my husband, of all people, and I think I told you this story, my husband doesn't watch motivational, inspirational talks. He doesn't really, follow that path. And he sent me the Lollipop Moment TED Talk, the Everyday Leadership TED Talk, and said, you have to watch this. And I was like, wow, if he's telling me I have to watch this, I have to watch this. And I was blown away. So can you summarize for those who may not have seen Everyday Leadership on TED as of yet, what the premise of that was and how that shaped your journey?
Yeah, what's interesting is I appreciate you saying it's motivational, inspirational. What's odd is that I never, and I guess I still don't think of myself as a motivational or inspirational speaker. And I guess that part of that is that I think there's still this concept for a lot of people that if you motivate and inspire on stage, that you lack some level of intellectual gravitas. Because, oh no, you're just up there to make people feel good. So it's fluff and cliche. And so it's actually a term I ran away from for a long time. Like, oh, you're a motivational speaker. And I guess the joke I heard someone make is that when you tell people that, they assume you're either a Tony Robbins wannabe or you live in your mom's basement at 40. And so it's something I've always, because I came from the education realm. And the idea of the lollipop moment, which is what ended up being this TED Talk, that really got a lot of traction out there in the world, came from this idea that most of the leaders that I knew in the world weren't calling themselves leaders, because we were educated from a really young age to see leadership as a relatively exclusive club. The power of example is one that we shouldn't gloss over. Whatever examples you give to people to explain a concept when they first learn it, not only does it shape how they think about it for the rest of their life, it limits how they think about it for the rest of their life. And so most of us don't realize how limiting a box leadership was without us even being aware of that limitation being put on us, because we were taught about presidents and scientific groundbreakers and people who conquered empires. Most of the examples were supposedly straight white men. And this has over and over again through the years, when generation after generation of people are taught like this, what it does is it creates a relatively narrow definition of leadership. And I wanted the opportunity to remind people that their leadership is not tied to their money, their education, how smart they think they are, how much money they make. But generally, you can say that. But when all the examples you're given go against that reality, why should people believe what you say when reality shows you something entirely different, right? And so my challenge was, how do I convey to a group, particularly of young people, because I ran the leadership program at U of T, and I was also running a national student charity. And how do you convince people who their entire life and their success in their life has been dependent on how well they impress people older than them? So teachers and professors, I'm working with post-secondary students, and their whole life, their success has been determined by figuring out what the person in charge wants and delivering it to them. And so it's awfully hard when you've been given all your rewards from pleasing others to be convinced and not feel as if, okay, well, you're training one day to have the power to recognize others, to give people rewards. You don't have it yet. And so what happened was, when it came time to try to convince young people that they weren't training for leadership one day, they could do it now, I needed to demonstrate that that was true. And I started telling this story about something that happened to me years before. I started by telling it to fundraisers who, in our charity, if they didn't reach their fundraising goals, these volunteers, they wouldn't call us again. They would just disappear because they thought we were disappointed in them. And they'd never done a fundraising thing in their life. They're 18, 19, 20 years old. They show up, they get hyped up at our conference, and they say, we're going to raise $15,000 for this charity we learned about 4 days ago. And they're amazing. And then they go home and they raise 8,000 or 500 or whatever. And then they don't call us back because they think we're ashamed of them. And so I started telling this story, trying to remind people that, yes, your goals matter. How much money you're going to make matters. But it's a lot more important the impact you make in your pursuit of those goals and how you behave in pursuit of those goals than what you actually accomplish. So I started telling this story that reminded me of that, which was in the midst of trying to set a fundraising record when I was doing this campaign for the first time, when I was trying to live up to what I felt a leader was, I had an interaction I didn't even know about. And a girl came up to me 4 years after it happened and said, the first day I was here, I was so scared, I was so intimidated and so convinced I wasn't ready for this that I quit while I was standing in line for registration here at school. And before I could say anything, though, to my parents to ask them to take me home, you came busting out of this nearest building, and you've got a big sign that's promoting the charity and a bucket full of lollipops because this was your icebreaker to talk to people. So you're walking along this lineup and you're handing out lollipops. And when you got to me, you got this little look on your face, and you looked at the guy next to me, never seen before. Like, we're just standing in line. It's the first day. Everyone's super scared. And you hand him a lollipop and you tell him, hey, you're standing next to this beautiful woman for the next 2.5 hours. You're just stuck here. Talk to her, man. Like, break the ice. Which I now point out every chance I get. An older me realizes that that was not at all respectful of her personal space and was really heteronormative. But we'll play this one to the end. I wouldn't do it now. The thing that made my career, I wouldn't do now 20 years later. But she said, you turned to this guy and you said, flirt with the girl, basically, because you're stuck in line with her and she's pretty. God, what a toxic man I was. And she said, I felt bad for him, so I take the lollipop from him. And you looked so disappointed, even though you look like you wanted me to take it. I do it, and now you look so disappointed. And you said to my parents, like, it's your first day away from home. Like, your first day, mom and dad isn't here to hold her hand. And she's already taking candy from a stranger. And she goes, that was the reaction. Like, people laughed. And that was my goal, I guess, was to make people laugh and feel more at home. And she said, but I want you to know, when everyone started laughing, it just shifted something in my brain. And I told myself not to quit today, but to quit tomorrow if you wanted to again. And then someone the next day did something else similar, and I put it off again and again. And I never did quit. In fact, I graduate in a few weeks, but I heard that you're leaving the campus. And before that happened, I had to come to tell you, you've been an incredibly important person in my life. And I'm going to miss you. And so good luck. And then she just kind of walks off, which you shouldn't do. Like, don't walk up and be like, here's an incredibly transformative thing you did, and now wander away, right? But she did come back, and she said, you should know this too. I've been dating that dude for 4 years since you introduced us that morning. And a year and a half after I left that interaction, a year and a half after she told me that, they invited me to their wedding, the two of them. And so she ended up marrying this guy in line. But the reason I tell the story, and the reason I wanted to tell it to those students, and I still tell it to so many other people, I had no idea it was going to have that kind of traction, was that I do not remember doing that. And it's a cool moment and it's a fun story. The problem is, even to this day, as I tell it again and again, because of the impact her telling me had, I do not actually remember the moment of that happening. All I have to go on is this memory this woman told me. And that to me is why I told those students that, and why I continue to tell other people that, is that yes, go out and try to make money, or go out and try to earn the title you want, or the position that you want in your life, or accomplish the things that you want. But it's not the things you do that are going to resonate. It's the way that you act in pursuit of them. And ultimately, leadership exists in these individual moments where we impact other people. And for me, the lollipop moment, which is what that term came from, like that story like bred that term, the lollipop moment. Ultimately, that was an accident. Like, that's, I think, what I want to get across to people, is that this may be the most powerful moment of leadership in my life compared to everything else I've ever done on paper. Like, that fundamentally changed the course of other people's lives in a positive way. And yet I don't remember it. And yet for most of my life, my drive was how good I looked on paper, and all of these things that we're taught to chase in order to look good: money, titles, prestige. I chased all of those. That's why I went to good schools and chased after grades and didn't sleep and beat myself up, right? But in the end, it wasn't that mattered. It's the way we behave on a day-to-day basis. And so the lollipop moment was an accident. I didn't mean to do that. The rest of my time in leadership has been focused on saying to people, if that is the kind of impact that actually makes leadership, we can't accidentally stumble into it. We better actually have a plan to do it. And so ultimately what happens now is I teach the plan. And I still like telling that story, which is a super long start to the interview, I know. But yeah, it boils down to the idea that leadership exists in moments of interpersonal impact. And it only exists when you're doing that. And you're not a leader when you're not doing things like that. And that's not a bad thing. But leadership isn't a rank. Like, you do enough and you earn it. And then whatever you do every day, you're still a leader because you earned it in the past. For me, a leader only exists when leadership is being demonstrated, which means the goal isn't to be like CJ as a leader. The goal is to live a life where people can look at you and say, CJ is usually a leader, or often a leader, or a huge percentage of your life you're being a leader. But the expectation isn't that it's something that you earn and then keep. It's something that we can only enjoy the title when we're engaging in the behavior. And I think if we look at it that way, we start to realize that it requires a daily recommitment to behavior, as opposed to a block of time through which you have to climb up a mountain. And once you get to the top, you know what? That's it. What you've done in the past earns you the title forevermore. That's not how we do it. It's a recommitment every day to the behavior that earns you that title. You're not a leader when you sleep. That's okay. Let's take that pressure off ourselves.
Right. And so you speak about that everyday behavior, and your lollipop moment was an accidental behavior, but there was something in that behavior that sort of shaped that whole experience for that individual. And I know, having, been through your online course, through your book, sat in one of your presentations, or your keynotes, there are a number of behaviors, and you have some really great tools. So where would you say, we begin? What does shaping behavior begin like, if we want to be, this true sense of leader in your frame? Because many of us are still kind of programmed to believe that leadership title or that leadership moniker is something that we earn and achieve, and then once it's done, we're a leader, right?
Yeah.
So what are the behaviors for everybody who is leading?
Well, I mean, your first question was, where do you start, right?
Yeah.
And my answer is on day one. And I mean, that's a big fundamental part of it. And it's because my work in day one leadership, which is the name of my company, began when what I was teaching at the program at U of T, the theory side of things, started to meld with great wisdom from other people and own experience. And what I started to realize is that it's ordinary things done with extraordinary consistency fundamentally are what change things. And that came from me because I understood the concept of what leadership meant and the theory behind it and the different ways it had been studied, explored, explained throughout history, right? But that doesn't necessarily relate to everyone. What I found actually is that when I went through a number of personal things, starting with a battle with bipolar disorder, which was years before I actually went out and found out what it was that was causing me struggles on a mental side. And I just assumed, well, I work in an intellectual world. You can't go out and say something that people still equate with mental weakness, which is what mental illness is. And realizing that being healthy mentally was like being healthy physically, it meant a daily commitment to certain behaviors, that you had to stay disciplined on a certain number of things that you did every day. At 2, that actually led to me losing 100 and some pounds because I was over 300 pounds. And again, what I saw happening is that on the first day of the mission, when you're all gung-ho and you're like, no, I'm starting something new, we do it a lot on New Year's Day, but this could happen at any time. You're super committed on the first day. I quit drinking. I'm a recovering alcoholic. And that was a big piece as well, because one of the things that all of those experiences had in common was this philosophy that says you can't worry about yesterday and you can't stress out about tomorrow. What you can do is control your behavior today. And that if you string enough of those consistent behavioral days together, you'll get to where you want. If you don't want to have a drink for the rest of your life, you choose not to have a drink today. And that's the only thing you worry about. If you get up yesterday, that's okay. Don't have a drink today. And oh my God, how am I not going to drink for the 4,000 days that make up the rest of my life? Who cares? Just get it from the time you get up today to the time you go to bed, you can't have a drink. And then the goal is to treat every day as if it's your first day of the voyage, because that allows you to leverage the commitment, the forgiveness, and the humility that comes from day ones. Day ones are about non-negotiable behaviors, and they can be tied to mental health, physical health, career success, leadership, whatever the case may be. So you start on day 1 by saying there are non-negotiable behaviors that have to be a part of every day of the rest of my life. What those behaviors are different for everybody. But my key is that what you need to do to determine them is your non-negotiable behaviors need to be tied to the values you want to stand for. Because every day your life is going to be wildly different for most of us. All right. This is the first time in a long time in my life where I know I'm getting up in the same place 7 days in a row. Mm-hmm. So my life's much different than your life, or much different than the lives of other people here who work 9 to 5 or who travel, whatever the case may be. The values you want to stand for as a person are going to be unique for each person. That doesn't mean they don't work with other people's. It doesn't mean there's right versus wrong, but there are values that once you realize they're what you want to define you, you get excited and fulfilled living them. The challenge is most of us don't know what they are. We haven't thought much about them. And so the tip that I always say to people is you got to start by defining the things you want to define you. All right. You want to be a person of integrity? What does that mean? You want to be a person of honesty? What does that mean? Actually fill out this sentence. For all of you watching this, listening to this, imagine someone follows you around for 30 days of your life and they see every interaction, public, private, online. And at the end of it, they were asked, okay, going just on this person's behavior, you had no idea that you were watching them. What 3 values do they aim to stand for above all others? What 3 values do they want to leave in their wake? What 3 values do they want to pass on to their kids? And I ask a lot of people that question. Most people can't tell me. I mean, we want to be good people, but unless we just use words that sound good, right? Like respect sounds awesome. Inclusivity sounds awesome. Equity, these are things I want to stand for. Cool. But if someone walked up to you and said, I'm sorry, the word respect doesn't exist in my language. Could you explain what it means in the simplest English terms possible? So I know, I can figure out what word it means for us. So I can figure out what behaviors. If you don't know that, you can't target it. If you don't turn respect into a finish line, if you don't turn integrity into a goal so that you know when you finish it, when you hit it, ultimately you could be embodying those values every day and you never give yourself credit for it because those moments where you're living your values are passing by unrecognized and uncelebrated. So step 1 is saying, these are the values I want to stand for, and not just say it. I'm the type of person who. The phrase I'm the type of person who is always followed by a lie. All right, I'm the type of person who lives with integrity, respect. Actually take a minute to say, these are the things I want to stand for. Now, my work is focused on helping people figure that out. But if you really wanted a place to start, the tool that we use is called the leadership test. And the leadership test came about because somebody made this suggestion. Imagine if every night before you go to bed, you have to prove you deserve another day on this planet. Like, not at the end of a quarter, a semester, a year, a 5-year strategic plan. Every single night before you go to bed, you have to prove you deserve to get up in the morning. And to do it, you got to pass the test. And the test has 6 questions on it. And you got to get 3 out of the 6. The thing is, imagine if you were given the questions in the morning. If that was the reality, those questions would be non-negotiable, because you wouldn't answer them in between emails and going to work and picking up the kids. You'd have to do them. And because what I do is I teach people how to take their values and turn them into these questions and then give them to themselves in the morning. And behavioral psychology says that once a question is in your brain, it makes your brain uncomfortable until it finds an answer. And because the questions are tied to the values that we want to define ourselves every day, what we do by taking this approach is we prioritize our to-be list above our to-do list. Like, I have a to-be list of 6 questions every day tied to 6 values that matter to me. And those are different for everybody. But the idea is that I have to find an answer for 3 out of those 6 questions every day. And one, it involves me identifying the values I want to live. And by turning them into questions, which is a whole other conversation we don't need to bore people with here, but it's based in behavioral psychology and the power of the question in driving human behavior. So instead of saying, this is the person I want to be every day, I say, these are the values I want to stand for. And these are the questions that if I answer them every day, I will end up living those values. It's impossible not to. And that is the key, is to say, okay, if this is the value we want to stand for, what is the question that you cannot answer without living that value? So, for instance, empowerment, all right? Empowerment is a commitment to helping other people expand their capacity to add value, right? Or empowerment is a commitment to, increasing others' capacity to add value, which is a vague thing to say. But the question, what did I do today to move someone else closer to a goal? That you can't answer that. If you have an answer to that question, you have lived empowerment. And it's a lot easier to go through life looking for the answer to a specific question, especially when your brain's desperate to find the answer, than it is to just sort of be like, oh yeah, at some point today, I'll try to identify a moment where I can do that. The question in your brain is a much more powerful driver of getting that done than just wanting to live up to a particular value. So you start on day one and say, these are the non-negotiable behaviors. And when it comes to leadership, what you say is, the non-negotiable behaviors are answering certain questions. Those certain questions are born from your core values. Because every day, even if everything else in your life blows up in your face, at least you can go home and say, well, I did do these 2 or 3 things today that are consistent with the person I want to be, even if the rest of the world screwed me. Because the fundamental premise of what we do is that, look, you're not always in charge of what you have to do every day. You are always in charge of who you are. But often we lose sight of that power. And if we don't use that power, we forget we have it. It's like any muscle, right? You don't use it enough, it turns into what I got around the middle here.
Right. So when I think about this values identification for individuals and hear what you're saying about, leading from that place every day and asking those really important questions to just do that pulse check every day in the morning. And I love the fact that it's the morning, because there's nothing that has given us context yet in the morning to kind of taint the way we might answer in that context. It's just you, raw self. But what is your perspective, and what would you tell listeners who identify key values of their own and then go into a workplace where they have their own values, and maybe they're synergistic, maybe they're not, but then they're also interacting with others that have a set of their own values, and now we're just like this melting pot of values? What does that world look like, and how does one navigate that world?
Well, the world looks like exactly what you've all lived through. So you know what it looks like because we've all been there. The interesting thing about values in companies and business is they get talked about a lot, and the idea of value alignment is way overblown because you don't need value alignment. What you need is a lack of value conflict. So it doesn't matter if values aren't the same. It doesn't matter if the company values and your values align, or the person next to you and your values align. It doesn't matter. And I know everyone likes to talk about how we can raise awareness of the values of and expectations of an organization, but alignment isn't that important. What's important is that they don't conflict. Because let's say that one of your core values is respect, and one of the core values of the person who works next to you is compassion. Well, those do not conflict. Yeah, they ultimately manifest in different priorities in terms of behavior, but they do not conflict. As a matter of fact, it's really hard for most values to conflict. Honesty and kindness bang heads quite often. And so like there are examples of it, but if your values conflict with your company's, then it's probably not a value that the company has, or it's not a value that you have. All right. Like a value is a decision-making criteria. All right. And that's what I think we really have to do is it's not just some word that's not a character trait. All right. A value is a decision-making criteria. And value is only a value if you think about it when you're making decisions. Because when you're making decisions in your life, if you're not accessing your values as the criteria you use to make it, like if you don't, value-based decision-making, and why I encourage people to think of their values, it's not so that they can align with their companies or other people's. It's so that you can engage in consistent decision-making that is understood and respected by the people around you. Different values don't cause nearly as many problems within a workplace as inconsistent and unpredictable decision-making. And when people say, oh, we have different values, it usually isn't the case that it's the values that's the conflict. What's bugging you about the other person is they're inconsistent in how they make their decisions, which means that you don't know what their values are. And so ultimately, why I encourage people to think of what their values are and to learn and to let other people know what they are is not to be like, these are my values and you're going to have to deal with that. It's these are my values so you can know what to expect from my decisions. Because once you identify your values, your decision-making becomes simple but not easy. Because once you have your values defined, what you have is a tool for decision-making. And when you have to face a decision, professionally or personally, what you do is you look at your values and you look at the options. And you ask which of these options is most consistent with these values. And the challenge with that decision-making platform is that it sucks. Like often the option that's most consistent with your values blows. Like it does. It doesn't allow you to look good or avoid punishments or take the money, keep the job, remain in the relationship. But it's always the decision you're happy you made 5 years from now. The reason I say figure out your values and use them as criteria and constantly point out what they are is because, look, you and I work together, and I know that these are the values that you use to make decisions. And I am about to engage with you on some sort of project. As I'm coming up with ideas, as I'm coming up with suggestions, I can think to myself, this is how CJ is probably going to process this because CJ has made very clear these are the criteria she used to make decisions. Now, I may not like that decision you're going to make. It may annoy me when I go and I'm like, oh, I know this is important to her, and I know she prioritizes customer service over profit, and that means that she's not going to love this, and we're going to have to butt heads over that. That actually might seem annoying, but not nearly as annoying as I have no idea how CJ is going to process this plan because 3 decisions ago, she was like, oh, no, that's cool. Like, we'll sacrifice customer service for this money. And then 2 ago, she pushed back really hard on a process that would have made us money because she claimed customer service was most important. People don't hate it when they disagree with you. They hate it when you're inconsistent in your decision making. And so to go back to your question, I'm sorry, I'm all over the place today.
It's great.
Don't worry about it if the values don't align. Our worry is if they conflict. And if you're conflicting with your company values on something, it might be not a case of whether your values are different. It may be a question of one of you is doing something that is a value at all, or if it is a self-serving drive to do things in a way that benefits you at the expense of other people. Some companies do adopt that, right? And that is not value conflict. It's an absence of values, right? Because that to me is if your criteria for decision making is always which option will get me the most, it's not actually a value. All right. It is a value is only a value if sometimes using it means you get screwed. Like that's ultimately what it is, right? I've never actually said that out loud before. So, but really, it's not a value if the fact that living up to it at some point doesn't cost you something that you might want otherwise. And that I think is the difference between a value and a decision-making or a self-centered decision-making principle. Is that values, sometimes using them to make your decisions will cost you things, but it will always give you a feeling that the decision was made that made you feel better about yourself 5 years from now, even if it might make you feel like crap about the world right now. So the reason I tell people to make decisions based on their values isn't so they can get along better with their company or get along better with their coworkers. It's so that they can be more consistent, which usually results in more respect for yourself and from your coworkers, even if they disagree with how you do it.
That is excellent. And it makes me ask the question, when we think about this concept of serving others, and I want to take just an excerpt out of your book here. And this is an excerpt on page 111, and it comes from the start of 109, where Horace had spent 27 years as a teacher before becoming a driver. And Horace went on to share some wisdom with you. And in one of his moments of brilliance said, "Drew, you are destined for greatness. We are all destined for greatness. Your greatness is waiting to be claimed, but like anything that you want to claim, you have to turn something in to get it." And he gave me one final look as we pulled to the hotel and said, "Drew, what you have to turn in for your greatness is service. Turn in your service, get your greatness." And that probably aligns quite well with what you're saying, is that at some point our values may actually work against what we think we need to do in the moment. They may actually, not feel like they put forward the right, outcome, but 5 years later, it's exactly what we needed to do. So let's talk about this concept of service, because if we're, living out our own values and serving others, we may have to make some compromises at times, or at least that's the assumption. Where do you land on that?
Yeah, well, is it a compromise is the question. If being the person you want to be, is it a compromise? It's not. Getting what you want and being the person you want to be often involves a compromise. And it usually means compromising. Usually we choose to compromise who we want to be in order to get what we want. But sorry, there's a couple of different ways of looking at this here. I love Patrick Lencioni's work. If anybody out there, whenever someone says, "Hey, what's your leadership must reads?" it's just filled with Patrick Lencioni's work. And I'm doing a weekly book section called Day One Reads. Some of it's leadership stuff, some of it's just others. My buddy Neil Pasricha released a book. He wrote the Book of Awesome. And during one of his promotional things, I went to watch him speak. It's been years since I'd actually seen him speak. He mentioned he read like 132 books last year. And I remember thinking, shit, I've read 4. And that was embarrassing to me. Like, I'm a guy who used to max out when he was a teenager, because I was not a cool kid. Max out when he was a teenager how many books he could take out of the library, to the point where I would run out 3 days later because they only let me take out 12, and I'd read 12 and young adult books in however many days, that I started borrowing my sister's whatever she took out. I've read the first 49 books of the Babysitter's Club series as a result of that. Team Stacy. But what I do now is once a week I make myself read a different book so that I can publish it and let people know, just sort of some ideas of what I thought of it. And Patrick Lencioni's, my newest one that's coming out this week, is one from Patrick Lencioni called The Motive, which is exactly about that, the idea of servant leadership. And he said something that I really liked. I love it when people have an ability to at least stand up and say, these things that we're just accepting as inherently good, we need to start questioning a little bit. And his is servant leadership, which is almost, I like the concept of servant leadership 100%. The thing that he says is that by calling it servant leadership, we give the impression there's another type. He's like, I think what we need to do is, instead of thinking, is it servant leadership or not, we simply have to say, there is only one type of leadership, and it is servant leadership. So stop using the word. That there's two motives for being a leader. There's rewards-based, which is, I earned this, I deserve this. It's a reward for all the hard work. And there's responsibility-based, which is, I'm doing leadership because it's hard and it sucks, but it's a responsibility that involves pain, but also involves reward. So that's why I'm going to do it. And I think that that's a key thing that we have to recognize, is that we can't keep calling leadership anyone who gains influence. And then we decide whether it's good or bad leadership, servant or non-servant leadership, social change leadership versus, all the different types. Sorry, I just blanked on the theory. I mean, this is what I used to teach. We've got that idea is there is no definition between the two. And what we're doing is we're causing a problem for young people by acting as if there's many different types of leadership, some which involves stepping on people's throats and rising and winning the White House through fear, or becoming a cultural icon by driving all of your development teams into the ground, borderline suicidal, making them work 90 hours a week. But hey, you built a massive company that changed the world. So you know what? It's a form of leadership. We got to stop calling it the same thing. It's not the same thing. There are leaders and there are catalysts and influencers for harm. And having profile and influence does not make you a leader. It's how you use that profile and influence. It's a matter of fact, it's being able to gain influence without demanding profile with it that is a fundamental part of what leadership is. And I think that's what Horace, who is a limo driver of mine in New Orleans, was trying to get across to us that day, is that leadership ultimately exists in how well you use your privilege and your opportunities and your days in general to find a way to further other people's experience or opportunities or whatever. And it doesn't mean you have to change fundamentally the structure of a screwed up world. What it does mean is that somebody who hands you a bag of groceries, or that person who you hired 2 years ago to be your front desk person, and your life got instantaneously better, but neither one of you really think leader because they just do their job quietly and well and don't demand the spotlight. If you can find a moment to create those, that is service to other people. That is the service of leadership itself, is recognizing it around us. Like, then you are serving leadership itself, because leadership recognizes leadership created. And that to me is what we talk about service and servant leadership. Let's stop identifying leadership as if it's a subsection of it is servant leadership. If you earned your influence and your prestige and your money and your access and your title through decisions that were fundamentally always designed to move you forward, that isn't leadership. All right? It is, you've gained influence and you use it for harm. And all leaders are influencers in some way, but not all influencers are leaders. And I think that's really important. And if you want to know the difference between the two, look about how you and other people, if you want to look and know if someone's a leader or a catalyst for harm, look at how they use fear. And fear is used all the time in our society. We all use it. We use it against ourselves. We use it against other people. If someone is adding fear to situations in order to win, they are catalysts for harm. If they are removing fear from situations to try to succeed themselves and others, then they're leaders. And the number one way you could distinguish between whether or not someone is a leader is how they use fear in their lives. If they ever use fear as a weapon, that is not leadership. And even the best, most wholesome leaders sometimes do negative leadership stuff. But I think ultimately that's how we figure out what the difference is, right? Is how people use fear. And I don't know if that answered the question that you asked, but every time we dive into this sort of what is leadership and there's good leadership versus bad leadership, I'm like, there's not, because if it's bad leadership, it's not leadership. But the problem is that we teach it the same. And we say, all these people are leaders. Look at all these dudes. All right, they're all leaders. Now let's talk about how some of them were also dicks, but they were leaders. And so you want to be the non-dick type of leader. I'm like, well, no, by using the same term to describe both types of outcomes, we're insinuating that they're the same thing. And I think we're going to be better off if we stop giving young people, in their mind, the option to achieve the things that society has held up on a pedestal, like money, fame. They can do that by choosing one of two paths, but they get to be a leader either way.
Right.
And then you get the, you know, the it's usually money speakers, right? Being like, they are, but then people are just sort of like, I'm going to teach you how to not give a shit about other people, because the reason that they're not successful like you is that they're not as tough and strong as you. And so you're going to have people tell you to sacrifice for yourself instead of going for the jugular. And that's what makes people weak. And we're going to teach you how to get to be a leader without taking that weakness. And, you know, like, there's lots of those speakers that you can see, and they write their books, and they talk about hustle culture and show up at 6 a.m. and work 90 hours a week, you know, hustle while they sleep so you can like party while they work. It's just crazy toxic.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we're off down a little different path there, but
No, it's okay. And that's, I mean, that's what we're here for, is to talk about some of these untapped gold mines. And a few key things that I've heard from you, and just want to restate again, you know, leaders recognize leaders. We're, you know, true leaders are here in service of others and supporting others into their own sense of leadership. And it's not fear-based by any stretch of the means. And we have this great opportunity as leaders to untap greatness in others. And that is probably the truest form of leadership, is really unlocking and untapping that greatness in others. And so what does that look like? So yes, service is a big part of that. And the values that you bring to that service play a very significant role. But what does untapping greatness in others look like when you are truly leading, stepping into yourself as a leader?
I think part of it too is you're not trying to untap greatness in others. You're simply trying to act as a catalyst for something, untapping something greater, right? And so this idea, I talk about in the book too, that greatest is the enemy of great, that we do love superlatives in our society, but the problem is our focus on superlatives tends to make us focus on a relatively small percentage of things in our lives as good, right? When you focus only on the greatest meal of your life, you kind of undermine the numbers 2 through 10. Those were also very great. And so I think it's important that I like a couple of things. Leadership is about serving others at its core, but I want to be very clear that it doesn't mean that every decision you make is wildly altruistic, right? That,
Right.
oh no, you can never think about. My argument is that when we start to identify the values we want to define us and live by them every day, we make fewer decisions that we regret as people down the road. The challenge with values, and the challenge with life almost in general sometimes, is the stuff that makes you feel the best about yourself, will often make you feel really crappy first.
Right.
And that's the challenge, is that doing the right thing involves feeling better later, and often involves feeling better because you got the crap kicked out of you first, right? It is so hard to make a decision that's going to cost you a job or a relationship because it causes pain. Because it's really hard to think ahead 5 years and just be like, man, when I think of this in 5 years, I'm going to be so goddamn proud of what I did here. That's really hard to focus on when it's definitely going to cause you pain in the short term. And so, one, I just want to make people believe that I'm not saying that everything I do in my life is like, it's not about me, it's about other people. It's honestly all about me. It's all about how I'm going to feel about myself in that time between turning off my screen and falling asleep. Because that's the scariest damn, like, this is when I have to make tough decisions. I often try to think of this moment because I didn't realize how scary it was to me. There's a time in your life, every night, where for a lot of us, we wait as long as possible between shutting off our screen and falling asleep. Because I didn't realize how scary to me the period when the lights are off and you have no distractions and your head is on the pillow, but you're not yet asleep. That is such a scary period for a lot of us, because there's nothing to distract us from thinking about ourselves and our decisions and who we are. even if it's only 10 or 15 seconds. I think that's why so many of us, including myself, keep the screen, the television, the phone on until we're so tired our eyes are about to shut, because it minimizes the amount of time we have to spend alone, silent, undistracted with our head on the pillow. Because in those moments, all you have are your memories of the decisions you made. And the ones you made that were against who you were, take a piece of you and never give it back. It like whittles it away. And you know, when you think about it, in those quiet moments when it's just you and your thoughts, and for most of the day, our working hours, we can fill those moments with distractions and noise and music. Oh, I'll listen to an audiobook, which is like, because I want to listen to an audiobook. No, it's because you don't want to walk alone with your thoughts. Yes, I'm sure the audiobook is a good thing. So what I always try to think about when I'm faced with a decision that's going to have short-term consequences is I start to realize if we make every decision in our lives as if we're explaining that decision to a group of people we respect 5 years from now, instead of, okay, I'm about to make the decision now, a lot of the noise surrounding our decision-making falls away. It really does. So I don't want to claim that every decision you make has to be completely selfless. Ultimately, when you make decisions that maybe hurt you in the service of a bigger value, it seems selfless because you're taking on pain for something bigger, but it really isn't, because 5 years from now, that is actually going to make you feel better. But I do get how hard ultimately that is to do. So I always wanted to say that when I talk about value-based decision making, I'm not claiming that I'm some sort of crazy altruistic person or that everyone is. I am pointing out that often serving others actually does, in the long run, really help you out, because it gives you evidence that you're the person you claim to be. And unless we can give ourselves evidence that we're the person we claim to be, we feel like every time we say it to ourselves, we're lying, which just whittles away a little bit more. And so I think it's really important to avoid putting yourself into a position where you're always lying to yourself because you don't have any evidence that you're the person you claim to be. So I think that's a really key piece. Unlocking the greatness in others, I think it's letting go of the idea that your job is to unlock the greatness in anyone. I think your job is to try to find a way to make other people, even for a moment, see something greater in themselves, in a moment, in their job, whatever it is. You don't have to unlock greatness in other people. You do want to be a catalyst for moments where moments are greater for people. And that could be a 15-second moment of greaterness.
It's a new word.
Or
can we hashtag that one when we post this?
greaterness. Or it could simply be, it could actually be like 3 years of I see something greater because I work with you every day. It's not your job to unlock greatness in others. It's your job to be a catalyst, which is to help people, give people something that they don't either have the ability or the knowledge that they have the ability to unlock on their own. A catalyst doesn't necessarily have its own power. But what a catalyst does is, when added to the right things, allows them to unleash or become something greater. Not necessarily greatness, but greater. And I think our job isn't to go unleashing greatness on the world. It's to find a way to be a catalyst for something greater in a moment, in a week, in a month. We all have different relationships with people, right? And it's like atomic leadership. Some people, I'm sorry, this is weird, I know, but I was kicking this around the other day after watching a Neil deGrasse Tyson Big Bang Theory type of thing, whatever. And I was just like, well, we kind of go through, if we're all atoms in the world, right? We're all on our own. We're like bouncing around in the world. Every now and then you're going to interact with another atom, even if it's just for a split second. And then because of that, both atoms bounce off in a different direction than they would have if they hadn't interacted. So we're all out there in the world creating these micro moments. And even if it's a fraction of a moment, both do change direction as a result. Your goal is that as you bounce into these other atoms in the world, these millions of other ones, that the new direction into which they bounce is a positive one. But let's face it, not all interactions with other atoms are these instantaneous ones that only happen once and you sort of move off into the world. Sometimes we have more structured relationships. So let's take a couple of hydrogen atoms and an oxygen one, and boom, we create something totally different together, right? So yeah, we're still individual atoms, but we have a new, more stable relationship with other people. And that allows us to do more, because an oxygen atom interacting with Certain other ones, nothing. Hydrogen's nothing. But you add H2O to any number of other structures and substances, it releases all new things, right? Like you add water to a million different things. You can put something in oxygen, nothing happens. You put something into water, huge things can happen. And so you've got water molecules. Then you put a whole bunch of them together, and it can blow down dams. It can flood cities. And so my idea is that, yeah, we're all atoms and we interact with each other individually in these moments, and you should aim for positive ones, but also realize that our relationships to others also sometimes have more stable, long-lasting ones. And sometimes in the more stable, long-lasting relationships is when we can truly release even more greatness, because we have this very special structure. And then sometimes you go through life and you keep discovering new people that you could bond with in these ever-increasing structures that allow for different things to happen. So I call it atomic leadership, this recognition that what you're capable of on your own is still positive or changes things, but that there are certain bigger, more stable structures that unlock even greater things that can happen as well. And so greatness, or unleashing greatness, or being a catalyst, sometimes you can be a catalyst on your own. Other times you need a couple of friends working with you so that you can be a catalyst together for others. And for me, if you look at the social world, much like you do the physical world of physics, you start to realize that, there's an interconnectedness here. And what it means to unleash greatness really depends on a million different factors. What structure you're in at the time, what structure they're in at the time, whether it'll be an instant, whether it'll happen over time. We can look at it all differently, but ultimately the idea is we're here to help unleash something greater, not necessarily greatness.
Right. And I love that. And I mean, that's what this.
So I'm just like, wow, I just got super like black hole theory reflective.
Oh,
there.
it's fantastic.
I'm going to watch this interview later and be like, what were you on?
I spend a fair enough amount of time in my spare time studying some of that stuff as well. Like I have some books on physics and quantum physics and whatnot. So I was right there with you. And it's what I take from that, and what I think is important for the audience to take from that, is that we are not just those singular interactions and those moments in time that we have with others. There are ripple effects for everything that we do, and the longer we are bonded to or connected to somebody, and that may not last forever, but the longer we are bonded to them, the more opportunity we have to increase what is great about that connection and about the individuals involved in that connection ongoing.
Yeah, and also remember sometimes, for what it's worth, that sometimes the true power in a relationship comes when it is dissolved.
Absolutely.
And so I think, sometimes the true power when you break certain bonds, and I talk about that in one part of my book when I talk about self-respect, is that part of leadership isn't just how you serve others, it's how well you serve yourself. And by that, I don't mean being self-serving, right? Which is, I'm going to make decisions so that I get more, is different than I'm going to make decisions that protect my physical and mental health, right? So sometimes the true power in your life comes when you break a bond that is keeping you in a relationship that you don't want to. So explosions happen when bonds get broken, right?
Absolutely.
And so, but sometimes that means the true power in your life involves breaking free from something. There's a quote that a songwriter I knew once said, which was, there's a difference between grounded and run into the ground. Some things keep you rooted and some just weigh you down. And you have to decide what you would rather keep around. And the idea that it's easy to confuse things that keep us rooted and give us strength with things that weigh us down, that we think they're the same thing, that to me really opened my eyes to realize that one of the tough things that leaders have to do is be able to take a look at their life and say, where am I settling? What things that I've convinced myself are strong anchors are actually like anchors that are weighing me down. Where in my life am I settling? Relationships, job, mental health, physical health, because I think it is so easy to settle because we're afraid that what we'll end up with is worse than what we currently have. And that's why we hesitate to do anything, is a fear that what we get at the end is worse than what we currently have. The challenge is, if you don't like what you currently have, where's the risk? Honestly, some of the most powerful development and powerful freedom in our lives is not something that we're looking for, right? We spend a lot of our lives looking for things that we think if we add it is going to truly unleash the power of happiness or joy or satisfaction. Often the biggest power in our lives isn't something we're looking for. It is finding out what we have to dissolve in order to release certain power. And that, I think, is something that took me a long time to realize. Like, you want to know, like the idea of hidden gold mine, like the idea of looking, a gold mine is looking for something. Like, we're out searching for something. And in some ways, like, instead of looking at going into a gold mine and trying to mine nuggets, which does yield things, right? Like, let's not be wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. But I also think about a story I heard from a speaker who was climbing the El Camino in Spain, right? Doing the big trail. And then you get to at the end of it, he said, you climb to the top of the mountain. And I'm so sorry I'm not remembering his name right now, because I want to attribute it to him, but you take a rock with you. And that rock, on this huge long trip, some people just do the mountain at the end. Some people do 1,000-mile walk on the El Camino trail. And it's a pilgrimage, basically. And you take with you a rock that symbolizes whatever it is that you're carrying with you. And when you get to the top, you put the rock down at the top of the mountain and you leave it there. And the power isn't reaching the top of the mountain, finding the gold nugget in the mine. The power is dropping the rock at the top of the mountain, throwing it down into the mine. Your power comes from what you gave up, what you threw away, what you let go, not necessarily what you gained. And a lot of us are seeking this hole in our lives. And ultimately, it's not really about what we're seeking. It's about finding what it is that we have to break off from our lives. You know, we all know somebody who's in a toxic relationship, and what's keeping them from exiting it is a fear that what they'll end up with is worse than what they currently have. And the fear of being without something is sometimes stronger than the fear of continuing to live through what is causing you pain. So
right. And that's
my life as a leader started when I quit my job. So
yeah, and I would have to say, I mean, we're right now coming out of the tail end of, you know, hopefully the tail end of this massive pandemic that is COVID. And I think a lot of us are being forced to say, what do I have to let go of? Not only what am I being forced to let go of, but what do I now want to let go of, because it's no longer serving me and I need to preserve my own mental health right now. Or I need to, you know, do something different for my physical health because what I used to do isn't there. And we're being forced to kind of make a lot of those decisions every single day. And some of us are doing really well with that, some of us not so well. But I'd like to kind of close it off on that note of, you know, there is this give and take at all times with what we're experiencing, right? Sometimes we are giving, sometimes we are giving up, sometimes we are letting go, and sometimes we are letting thrive, right? Letting others thrive, letting ourselves thrive, and whatnot. And so if there's one last thing that, you know, we haven't heard yet from you, or we should hear that would, you know, close this off nicely, what might that be?
Well, I guess I'll start with something simple. You said one thing and I said I'll start with. That's the problem with my answers. The greatest untapped resource, gold mine available to leaders, and by that I mean anybody who chooses to positively impact others and the world on a daily basis. Number one untapped resource that we ignore is sleep. And after all of the let's wax poetic on the physics of leadership, I'm just going to be straight up here. Sleep more. There's a book called Why We Sleep, and I don't know of any book I've ever read that changed my behavior more, like literally overnight, like the next time, when it's made me see that as an adult, failing to sleep, I think 6 to 7 hours a night is worse for you than smoking. And, you know, the idea that in the service of something, you know, else, we give up sleep. It's the biggest gold mine that you have available to you that you just board up, fill with gravel, and walk away from. I don't get why. So I think we'll start with that one too. And I'll also say this: ask yourself when you say things like I need to preserve my mental health, or have you been doing that so far? Like, a lot of people, I think they're just like, oh, you know, I need to preserve my mental health through all of this. I'm like, well, I think the bigger problem we have is that we weren't preserving our mental health before this. and we were not mentally prepared to deal with anything beyond, like, there's a threshold of crappy in our lives.
Yeah.
And what happens is we make decisions going through our lives, particularly financially. And one thing that I think this has opened our eyes to is that many of us generally live beyond our means on a regular basis. And like, we're like just on the cusp of one road bump blowing up our entire financial lives. And I think that, you know, a lot of us did not take care of our mental health before all of this happened. And part of this is not, well, I have to deal with my mental health because of COVID. I'm like, no, COVID has brought into sharp relief that we don't take care of it enough anyway. And I think that is something that I hope, when we move through this back to something that looks like what it was before, I do think that we need to stay disciplined, because if you do not consciously focus on certain behaviors on a daily basis, you just stop doing them. Like, the muscle turns to fat in a hurry. And I worry about how fast, once, you know, some things are loosened, or we sort of say we're going to, like, let's say there was a vaccine developed tomorrow, which is a long, obviously not going to happen. And if it did, there'd be large numbers of people who wouldn't take it.
Right.
But the thing is, what I think we need to resist and to take a little time to reflect on is, are we just going to forget all the lessons we're learning right here?
Right.
Which is, oh, no, I just want to go back to normal. I'm like, normal was bad for us. Normal was bad for you. Normal, you didn't sleep enough. Normal, you didn't take care of yourself. Normal, you know, we treated our mental wellness as if it's something we took care of when we had time. And also, mental wellness isn't figuring out a way to not feel stressed out. I think mental wellness is strengthening how long you can feel stressed out for, and how well you can function while feeling stressed out. And I think that we mix up what mental health actually is, which is like never feeling bad, never feeling scared, never like almost freaking out. It's not. It is not about, like, it's not about decreasing the number of times where your mind is at its worst. It's preparing yourself to better function when your mind is at its worst. That, I think, is the difference. And I think that mental health is not about removing the toughest stuff we face or how we react to it. It's about building our resilience for the same amount of crap we're dealing with now. Mental health isn't less crap going on in your mind. It's
Right.
more resilience to deal with the crap that is going. And I guess the last thing, you know, if I leave you with one thing, is that you are not defined by your thoughts. And I think a lot of people, when they listen to speakers, particularly people who are qualified as motivational, is that you look and you're like, I'm not that happy, or I'm not that like positive, or I'm not that living life with love and forgiveness and gratitude, right? Because that's often what we get. We're like, if you could just find a way to let go and focus on the good and the gratitude and live life with love. And it sounds great, but I don't know about you, but when I hear it, I'm just like, yeah, but I'm not that, like, I'm not there. And what we've done is we made people believe that feeling anger and jealousy and bitterness and fear is a character flaw. And what to truly do to be an evolved person is to find a way to get to that level where you no longer feel those emotions. And that makes you a good person. And I'm just like, hell's no. Because most of the people I know, when your best friend asks you to move, your first reaction isn't, oh, sweet. It's, I want to help you move. But,
Right.
and then people judge themselves because they're like, oh, I didn't just jump to like, oh yeah, look, if you feel anger or bitter or resentful, and then there's this voice that's like, but a good person wouldn't feel resentful when that person asked you to move airplane seats so they could sit next to their girlfriend and they sit in the middle seat. Which is what got me thinking about all this once, when I had a sweet ass seat and a guy came up and said, can we switch? And he's like in row 42 in the middle. And my thought is like, no, like, come on, I paid for this like cool extra seat. But then there's a voice in my head going, the guy you want to be would let him sit next to his family. And I was judging myself because I'm like, oh, if you were really the good guy that you want to be in your book, you wouldn't have even hesitated. And then I realized, but no, I moved seats. And I think there's probably a lot of us out there who judge ourselves because in our minds, we don't immediately go to the most wholesome servant leadership move.
Right.
And because of that, we're bad people. I'm like, no. Did you process the fact you didn't want to do it? Compare that to how you actually wanted to behave as a person and choose to do it anyway. That's leadership. And that, I think, is a hell of a lot harder to do than to be like, oh yeah, I want to do this and do it. It's a hell of a lot easier to create a process and an awareness that allows you to translate your most negative thoughts and not have them translated to negative behavior. That's a hell of a lot harder than it is to just turn yourself, like, to find a way to turn yourself into a person who doesn't have the thoughts, right? Forgive yourself, every last one of you, for all the negative thoughts you have. If they do not match the behavior, that's leadership, because you have created a decision-making process that takes your worst impulses and processes them into behaviors that aren't negative behaviors. That is leadership, not finding a way to remove the negative thoughts from your head, because they don't go away. And we got way too many great leaders and good people who are convinced they're not, because they haven't found a way to get rid of the negative thoughts in their head about other people, about what they have to do, about how they feel about other people. Don't worry about it. Don't focus on making your mind and heart pure. Focus on being aware enough and disciplined enough to take the impure stuff that's in your head and make sure that it doesn't turn into the behaviors you put out into the world. You're not a bad person if you think bad things. You're a bad person if you allow those things to turn into bad behaviors. And even then, you're still not necessarily a bad person unless you don't care that you're doing it. You know what I mean? You're not the worst thing you've ever done. You are not the worst thing you've ever done. And that is hard for me to come to grips with.
And that is a fantastic finish on this conversation, because I think it takes pause. I think it encourages people to take pause on what you just said. So I thank you so much for that. I thank you for all of what you've said, all your wisdom, and just everything that you bring to the world and to leadership. So I appreciate you being here. And for any references that you've stated today, I'll try to make sure that we put them on the website on untappedgoldmines.com and anywhere where we can leave comments that can be linked to, so on YouTube and anywhere else. So again, thank you for being on Untapped Gold Mines, Drew, and I appreciate you. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
I appreciate you. Thanks for this honor.
Thank you.